answer the question.
I would certainly like to.
Jackie, welcome back.
Thank you, Pat.
I know you had a big audience today at one of the real estate boards.
Yes.
Now, you are the leading expert, as far as I'm concerned, in the Bay Area, maybe in the universe, on condo townhouses, planned unit developments, common interest subdivisions.
Yep.
Speaking of which, common interest subdivision.
Common interest developments.
Common interest developments,
Right.
excuse me. And you mentioned in the past that is the umbrella.
It is the umbrella that encompasses both condominiums, planned unit developments, single-family housing tract, multiple use, anything that more than one person commonly, openly shares in other common area.
Okay, so working backwards, we have single-family homes, for instance, in the Bay Area, and there might be a tract of single-family homes, and they have a neighborhood swimming pool.
Yep, that's part of a CID, or common interest development.
Okay, and there would be governing documents with that neighborhood.
Yes, there would.
Okay, now nowadays, what would be the dues on something like that? Or not, you don't like to say dues, right? You see assessment fees.
Dues, that all means the same
Okay.
thing. Give us your money so we can operate.
Right. Now, this is what maybe we should mention those numbers because this show might air at different times of the year and whatnot. But now the next step up might be single-family homes in a gated community.
Yes.
And they have a common roads and fences and gates and things like that. Is that what?
That's also a common interest. Could have a golf course, it could have a little lake, playgrounds, park areas, walkways. There's so many different variations of what a common interest development. It's where everybody shares in the operation of common area.
Okay. Now, we have learned, most of the realtors around the Bay Area take your seminars, and you've been on the show many times. As a real estate agent, when I represent a seller, we need to order these governing documents.
That's correct.
And per state law, we have to gather these documents, pay for these documents, and then give them to the buyer.
That's correct.
Okay. So what I do, of course, being a good agent, I take those documents and I give them to your firm to analyze them, give them a report card, organize them, so now the buyer knows what they're buying.
That's correct. And your seller is protected because they have the risk management that we've gone through the documents, and we tell them if something is missing, and we can always go back and try and access any missing items or documents.
Right. And so that's what's nice about your service, that we not only tell the buyer what we have, but also tell them what we don't have. And we could go back for another pass and request these items. For instance, sometimes we're missing a budget, or we're missing newsletters, or whatever the case may be. We make another pass at the management company
That's
to gather
correct.
these documents. So this is another thing that's a little confusing when we say homeowners. So it might be, let's say there's 117 houses or townhouses in a community. Those are the homeowners that live there or own them.
That's
right?
correct. Own in there, yes.
Yeah. And you've talked about in the past that they create a little government, so to speak, a board of directors,
Yes.
right? Now speak about
They
that.
elect a board of directors, and your bylaws and your articles of incorporation, but in your bylaws it will tell you how many board members you need to operate that corporation.
I see.
It'll tell you how often they have to, how long they'll serve, when they have to have an election, how
Yeah.
often they do it. In the larger projects, there's usually 5 board members, and 2 of them might be staggered into 2-year terms and 3 into 1-year terms.
I
So
see.
then the next year you're not relieving all of the board members, you're reevaluating and getting new members to come on to fill those positions when you
I
elect
see.
them.
Okay.
So but it is all self-governed. They sometimes will hire a property management company that assists them, and they're supposed to guide and direct the board of directors and help keep them out of trouble.
Right.
But there's a body of laws that oversees all of these common interest developments,
I see.
and it's called the Davis-Sterling Act.
Okay, now by body of laws, can you explain
That
what means?
is the corporate laws, the business or professional laws, and the civil codes that tell people what they
Wow.
can and can't do with their
Sure.
property. And that came into being in 1986. Now in 2015, it became a standalone law. So the Davis-Sterling, it can change within that body of laws, which are all these other ones that were pulled together.
Nice.
And then when the business professional code general doesn't change, when
Right.
it changes, we
Yeah.
don't have to change the documents.
I see. And of course, those are the 2 lawmakers that created
Davis was Gray Davis.
Right.
And the Sterling is Larry Sterling. And Larry Sterling is now a partner in a law firm in Southern California that have put together an absolutely amazing website.
The website, right.
Davis-Sterling.
Okay.
Anything you want to know, you can go onto that website, go to a category, and it'll show you exactly what the law says, and they give you some hints on the legal aspects.
Okay. Now, we were speaking before the show, and you have a student here from your seminar, one of the agents. We were talking about the number of sales last year.
Yes.
Over 500,000 sales in California.
In California.
Under this umbrella.
That's correct.
Okay.
This type of housing.
This type of housing.
Yep.
Now, let's get back to the, so that we have the Homeowner Association. They have a board of directors. And often, it seems to me, here in Silicon Valley where I operate, they hire a management company.
There's about 48% of the associations that don't have management.
Wow.
They do self-manage
Wow.
or a form of it. So, but generally there are large property managers who will take on the day-to-day operation. When people need to phone somebody, they pick up the phone and call the management company.
Sure.
And
Okay.
everything filters through that management company, and they make up the agendas for the meetings, provide the board with a package that they can go through.
Right.
Because boards can't act on anything or discuss anything that's not already on the agenda. You
I
can't
see.
just drop a new subject on them. And that is to be given them the consistency of knowing what everybody's going to go to speak about. And a lot of these associations, they all have to post or provide copies of the meeting, so notices, so that anyone who wants to come can come.
I see. Now, you have in different shows that we've done together, you mentioned they do have private meetings or closed-door meetings occasionally?
Those are called executive sessions. Those are generally called when they're doing disciplinary action, when somebody's delinquent and they're going to be doing a lien on the property, or if they're talking about contracts. Those kinds of things can be done as just the board of directors.
I
They're
see.
not open meetings. Everything else is considered an open meeting.
Okay. Now, repairs. We often see, depending on the age, it's had a lot of rain and a lot of sunshine, and the sides of the building and settling, they need repairs.
Right.
And they go back to see, do we have enough money to make these repairs? Can you speak about that in assessments?
Well, the law under the Davis-Sterling Act requires the board of directors to do a physical inspection every 3 years.
Wow.
They do it's not a component study where they drill into the walls and things like that, but they go in and they say, we're responsible for the roofs, the siding, whatever they're responsible for. And they list those. They list the life expectancy, and they list what it would cost if they had to do it today. CAR got a bill passed in 2008 that required the association to also provide the documentation, the same list, only now they tell you how many years that component's been used.
Oh, good.
And what they should have in the reserve. So if you had a roof that had a $400,000 price tag, it's a 20-year roof and you've already used 10 years of it, you should have $200,000 set aside in the reserves for the roof.
I see. Okay.
Now, because the board is volunteer and they don't like to pay any more than they have to, they sometimes don't fund it. But the concept is a really good one. It says everybody pays their fair share of the usage of those components as they own it. So, you know, someone will call me and say, well, I don't want to pay for Pat's roof. And I say, well, do you have a roof now? Well, yes, I have a roof now. That's what you're paying for, the use of that roof. So when they go to sell it, they've got two things. They've got the appraisal, which is the market value, which we know in California is very crazy right now.
Sure.
Multiple offers, over list price, whatever.
Right.
And so that appraisal is based on sales. But now you're buying into a corporation. And that corporation is going to maintain, preserve, and enhance those properties. And that's where this disclosure on how much money they have or should have comes up. And in the package for the budget every year, they have an assessment reserve funding disclosure. And in that, they have to disclose what should be in the reserves for the year of 2017, and then what do we anticipate will be there. And when you subtract the two from each other, it's either a plus or minus. In most of the associations, it's a minus. That
Right.
means that they're underfunded in their reserves by X dollars. So when you go to buy or sell a property, your value of your property, the realistic value of that corporation, is directly related to how much money they have in the reserves. So if they
Right.
don't have enough money in the reserves, then the agents can go back and negotiate for the buyers in that deficit.
So that's when I began, and for many years in real estate, buying and selling condo townhouses in these communities, the listing agent would brag about that they have 500,000 in reserves, and then that would be like a domino effect. We have 500,000. They have 500,000 in reserves. But of course, with your company and what we know now, they probably should have 700,000 in reserves.
Or a million.
Or a million.
Yeah.
So that was a little deceiving, to say the least.
What you're doing is you're doing a sales and marketing. So if somebody has 500,000 to be put aside, you're immediately only thinking about your unit. You know, it's just kind of an emotional attachment. Instead of looking at the bigger picture that they're responsible for 137 units.
Yes.
And that 500,000 is then divided amongst all of them, but they have to do that list. And a lot of the associations don't realize that they have to do that reserve study. If they don't have that, or if they've got one that's older than 3 years, how do they know their numbers are current? These are not numbers that are set in stone, Pat. And the big thing that I always say is that they're very mutable, because 1 year maybe the roofs really do wear good, but you guys had a lot of rain this last year.
Sure.
So a lot more roof repairs had to be done. If the siding, the same thing there. So what they're doing is they're having to adjust those numbers, and the law requires that the board meet on a quarterly basis to review those numbers and where they are financially.
It seems to me a lot of buyers and sellers think that it's not a waste of money, but it's not being put to good use, which in my experience is incorrect. We're adding value to the building and to the HOA. Anything you put into that is going to come back to you on a resale.
Well, if you have two houses and one has been totally refurbished and remodeled, and you have one next door that nothing has been done to it for 20 years, which one is worth more?
Exactly, yeah.
And it's a pay me now or pay me later. You know, the board of directors or the owners, they know that they're going to sell that property someday. What they don't realize is if there's not enough money in the reserves, they're going to have to make some adjustments in their pricing.
Right.
And so it's a pay me now or pay me later type of
Now,
situation.
I'm involved in a probated condo right now, and every building, well, there's 6 buildings. Every unit's 40-year-old condos, and every unit was assessed, special assessment, $22,000. Well, they're working on the outside of every building. They're taking off the siding, and they're putting in tar paper and insulation and just redoing, giving it a whole overhaul. Each building, one building at a time. And when that's finished, that's going to add value. That's going
It will definitely.
to each building. Now,
But not before they did a special assessment.
right, exactly. And everybody is paid except 2. So that's another story. Have your daughter on for that show.
Yeah, that's
okay.
true.
now, getting back to the townhouse, let's speak about the architecture. We spoke about before the show. I have a client, I helped her buy the place, and we're going to be selling it. And it's 3 single-family homes. It's old farmland in Willow Glen, Silicon Valley. 3 single-family homes, and in the back, where the farmhouse used to be, is 3 duet homes, 6 townhouses. But it's condominium ownership.
Well, the ownership is very interesting because if you're talking about a condominium, you only own the airspace.
Right.
You own the walls in, the
Right.
floors up, and the ceiling down.
Right.
But then there's the maintenance items. And in a lot of times, they just call it that because you only own airspace. If that's the case, then you might, if you have to look at the governing documents to see what are they responsible for.
Right.
In a planned unit development, where you own the building and the land underneath it, you still have to do that because the obligation of maintenance is always within the CC&Rs, and it's different on every project, regardless of whether it's a condo or a P.U.D.
Yes, that's the trick. You have to look at those documents.
The documents definitely need to be reviewed.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned how you've been involved in a property where there are single-family homes, 27 single-family homes, but that had a certain
The single-family houses were built, and the city, for some reason, required them to be in condominium ownership, airspace. but in the governing documents identifies all the maintenance work that needs to be done, and it's diverted back to the owner. So the owner is responsible for the exterior painting, the roof, everything.
Wow.
So again, you have to go to the governing documents to find out what is and is not the responsibility of the owner.
Now, we've spoken in the past about the complaints and whatnot. When you have a complaint, oftentimes, by the way, most of the townhouses, condo complexes that you see, communities, it might be 80% owners and 20% rented.
Well, that depends
Okay.
because it depends on the price range. And the upper level, yes, the people are going to own or occupy them. But on the ones below that, it could be anything because people like investments.
Sure.
So a lot of the projects have established an the owner occupancy rental. Lenders want to see a minimum of 51%. Most of the lenders even go as far as saying we want minimum 70%
Sure.
owner occupied, because for some reason they believe that the owners take better care of the property.
Right.
That's not always the case. I never saw any armbands where people would say I'm a renter or I'm an owner.
Right.
But the idea is that renters sometimes don't know the rules, don't follow the rules, and the responsible party is always the owner of the unit. So depending on the price range of the project, you might find more rentals in the lower level than you do in the upper level.
Now, for the people living in these communities, they might have one that's rented. And the renters are not living by the rules. They're playing the TV and radio late at night. They're swimming at 2 in the morning and things like that. What is the complaint process for?
Each association sets up their own process, but generally you have let's say that it's the board of directors that is managing, and you would go to the board of directors, you would write them a note stating what your problems are and that you've kept a log saying on this date that this was what happened. On this date I went to park and had one of my guests park in the visiting parking. There was none because the owners were of that unit, or the renters were using it. So you have to go through the board of directors. If it's a management company, you send your complaint to the management company. They then present it to the board of directors.
I see.
Then they can have a hearing, or you can go direct to the party that you have the complaint with and see if you could resolve it that way. In most of these associations, they would use arbitration or mediation to resolve problems if they couldn't do it internally.
Okay, so that's then really a good plan for any neighbors to keep good records
Yes.
of the complaints. Okay.
And you don't need to put a video camera out there. But what the concept is here is you keep a log of when these things happen. Sometimes it doesn't even bother everybody else around them, but it really is irritating to you because you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to work, and these guys are still partying all night. You
Yes.
know? So they usually have a house rules, what you can and you can't do. The use restrictions in your governing documents under the CC&Rs will also tell you things about whether or not you can change something, what color draperies you might need to have to the exterior so that you can have bright chartreuse, and they're
Yes.
beautiful, and bright purple or whatever. They wanted consistency, and that's what they did. They made some different restrictions on that.
Okay, that's a good segue into, you have spoken in the past that there's a reason why we have the same type of windows, the same type of garage doors, the same type of front doors, and the same colors. Can you speak to that issue?
Well, what the concept was is that if you had a community and you kept it all the same color, the roofs were all the same, the garage doors were all the same, front doors, that there was more consistency and easier to keep up, so that some people wouldn't be painting their building purple, some chartreuse, some yellow, some red.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't really fit a contour of most of what the people in the area might like. Some areas might like that. I mean, you go to foreign countries and you get all the salmon colors and
Right.
things like that. But the consistency is where that's at, so that we're easier to maintain.
Okay. There is a community, we don't like to say complex, right? Community.
You can call it
A
anything you want.
Yeah, community that I know of here in Silicon Valley, and they're now changing it to allow anyone can paint their front door any color they want, just the front door. So that'll give them something to put their own mark on it. So everything else stays the same.
But
you
I'm
can do
going to be
whatever-
offended if you put chartreuse on
Yeah,
there.
yeah, okay.
It depends, because I've seen that happen. Do they have to go through an architectural process?
I don't know. I'm
See,
not
I don't
associated
know.
with. It's across the street from where I'm working on a property. Yeah.
I would be concerned about that
Yeah.
because it's not the consistency. You have no control over the colors.
Maybe that might be a good way to do it. Is say, here's 10 colors that you could use, and you
Pick any one of these that you want.
hired a professional designer
That's
to do
the
it.
best way to handle those
Yeah.
kind of things, absolutely.
Okay. Now, in terms of construction, people often say, well, gosh, this is too small. We could easily push this out or push this room out. So, as you know, the footprint is the footprint as a rule, correct?
Right, it is. And generally, if you were to go get your building permits to do something like that, the city would send you back to the homeowner association to the architectural control. The idea was, I know that sometimes people didn't want to use their garages to park in, so they would make a man cave or a woman cave with their, bows and all that good stuff. And they said, no, that doesn't work. You have to park your cars in there. If you've got a screened-in patio, they might allow you to screen it in, but to actually build it into another room, they might have problems because you've got to get building permits. You would have to make sure that the association approved of it, and that it didn't affect the value of other properties.
What about people often, when I see these young people come through and they say, boy, we'd like to take this wall down, because they like, the big open space,
yeah.
right? And we like to take this wall down. We'll buy this property if we could take these wall downs, in other words.
If it's not a permanent wall, one that's holding up the upstairs unit or the upstairs, then they can probably do that. But they still have to go through the architectural control and the building permits.
And the building permits.
That's correct.
So it's really not part of the sale. It would really they'd have to buy it and do it later. Maybe they could do their due diligence if they had the time.
You could probably do their due diligence, like you said, if they had the time. Absolutely.
Okay. What about when, I know you have, your daughter worked with you for years, and now we have people, during the Great Recession we had a lot of landlords that got behind and people got behind. When people are delinquent, is that attached to the property eventually? How do they?
Yeah. Well, when you buy the property, you have this conditions, covenants, and restrictions which bind you to that association. If you don't pay your assessments, you'll do the first month they'll send you a notice. The second month they'll send you another notice, and the third month they'll send you a notice that you're going to be assigned to a collection company. And there are specific collection companies that handle just those types of things, which my daughter has a company. And then they would put a lien on the property. They would ask you for the money. If you didn't pay it in 30 days, they could put a lien on your property. Once that lien is put on, they can't take it off unless you pay the dues or the assessments.
I see. Okay.
And then once you've paid it off, then they release the lien. Now this happens to a lot of associations. I had one the other day where they got foreclosed on and the lien was on the property. The bank never really took the title, and they didn't owe any assessments during the time that they owned it, but the previous people had a lien, and the new buyer bought it knowing that that lien was on there, and then they tried to refinance it. They had a very difficult time refinancing it because they couldn't get the lien off.
Wow.
But that's a very exceptional case. There are ways of getting that fixed, but I mean, it does pop up from time to time.
Okay. We're closing out here. You're probably seeing a lot of this Airbnb. Is there a problem with that, with these associations? Is that?
Funny you should ask that. I went to a seminar last Friday, and that was one of the things they talked about. Most of the associations are starting to put in no Airbnb because of the in-transit people coming in and out, using the facilities. It's really very disrupting in a community.
Sure.
So they don't like to have it that way. Some of them say that you can't rent it for short term being anything under 30 days. So there are a lot of things that are coming up around that. You're going to see more and more of the governing documents restricting that.
What about in Silicon Valley? Throughout the Bay Area, it's very expensive, and it might be 3 engineers with a little sleeping bag in each room. Is there a body count for each room?
The city of San Jose, I know, and most of the other cities do have no more than 2 people per bedroom.
Okay, 2 adults per bedroom or 2 people?
2 people.
2 people.
But if you have a baby, you can have your baby in there. I mean, there's a lot of different restrictions. They will show up in your CC&Rs, and you've also got to look to your city or county to see if there are any restrictions on that there too.
Beautiful. Jackie Berry, the name of your company?
Community Association DataSource.
Thank you for coming out today.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks again for watching Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching.